All right, today we focused on the volume of cylinders. We went over some guided notes for the first half of class. We didn't really go over this sentence. This scenario is, I guess, useful, but it's not as useful as everything else we did. So for starters, I started by reminding the class the difference between the diameter and the radius. You need to know the differences between these two. The diameter in a circle is going to be a line that goes across the entire circle. And the radius, if I have a circle, it is a line that only goes halfway across. Diameter is exactly twice as big as the radius, so you will need to cut that in half if you are going to use the diameter and turn it into the radius. A little bit bright. For volume, volume is the amount of 3D space that is occupied by an object. Volume can also be referred to as capacity. When finding the volume of a cylinder, you will have to multiply the area of the base by the height of the cylinder, and that's represented by this formula over here. So that H represents the height, and the B represents the area of the base. All right, that's what the B stands for, that's what the H stands for. Now, the base of a cylinder is always a circle. Cylinders, they're always made up of two circles. Sorry, excuse me. So to find the area of a base, we are going to have to use the formula pi r squared. This is the formula for finding area of a circle, which is what the base of a cylinder is. So another way to look at it is that this formula could be rewritten as volume equals pi times the radius squared times the height. Now, one quick important note. Unlike in years past where you would generally always make pi equal to 3.14, from now on, very important, always use the pi button on your calculator unless told otherwise. Okay, your calculator, pretty much all calculators do have a pi button, and that will calculate pi as accurately as possible, unlike when we use 3.14. That's not always super accurate. So we have some example problems down here. I'm going to just move this camera a little bit closer so it's a little bit easier to see. We have a few example problems. I'm going to move that over so I can move the calculator a bit closer. So we have this right here. We have 3 cylinders. This one, it tells me my radius is 6 inches and my height is 4 inches. And it asks what formula will be used. Well, we're going to use this formula right here. All right. So we have the formula, which is pi times the radius squared times the height. And in fact, that's going to be the formula we use for all of these. Pi times the radius squared times the height. Pi times the radius squared times the height. Now we're going to plug in the values. We plug in my radius for the r, and we're going to plug in my height for the h. All right, so let's go ahead and plug those in. We have pi times the radius, which is 6 squared, times the height, which is 4. Now, in order to actually calculate this, we are just going to plug in that whole thing into our calculator. So, to activate the pi button, you might have noticed it. It's right here, a little bit above the division symbol. But if I push this button normally, that happens, and that's not what we want. Instead, what we're going to do is click second, make sure we can see that arrow, then we push the button, and that will turn on pi. So we have pi times 6 squared, so 6. To use an exponent of 2, we can just click this button right here, and that will give us an exponent of 2. And then we are going to multiply that by 4. So parentheses 4. So pi 6 squared 4, exactly as we wrote it. Now, most of the time when you go to do these problems, you will get an insanely long decimal. That is because pi is an irrational number, and we're multiplying it. So we're going to end up with another irrational number. The directions are to round to the nearest hundredth. So your hundredth is going to be your third decimal, or second decimal place. So there's your tenths place, hundredths, thousandths, 10,000ths, and so on. But we want to round this 8, but we have to decide if we round it up or down. To decide where to round this number, you have to look next to it. If the number next to it is 5 or more, then you round up. If it's 4 or less, then you let it rest. You do not round up. In this case, it's a 9, so we're going to turn that 8 into a 9. And that's going to give us 452.39. That's going to be our answer, and that's going to be measured in inches, specifically inches cubed. All right, so 452.39 inches cubed. And then we just do the same thing to the rest of these problems. For number 2, it tells me my diameter is 8, which means that my radius is going to be exactly half of that, 4. So we're going to plug this in. We have pi times the radius, which is 4, squared, times the height, which is 10. Same thing as before, we're just going to punch in all of those values. 4 squared times 10 gives me 502, so 502.65. This time we round down because that number next to it is a 4 or less, so we do not round up. And this one was measured in centimeters, so that's going to be centimeters cubed. For number 3, we have, once again, diameter, so I have to cut that in half. Radius of that would be 5. And we are going to plug these in. We have pi times the radius, which is 5, times the height, which is 2.5. And once again, same as before, we would just plug all of this in exactly as it is to get our answer. And that's going to be 196.35. This would round up because of that 9. So we round this up to a 5 instead of a 4. And that was all for our first page of the guided notes. On the back side of our guided notes, there were a few more things to take note of. We did not do anything with question number 11. It was just a little bit redundant, and we were running low on time. For for this little note, it says to leave an answer in terms of pi. This means that you will multiply everything except for pi and leave the pi symbol. That's what you needed to do for this. Anytime it says in terms of pi, that just means you are treating pi like a variable. You are not going to calculate it. You're going to leave it alone. The way that looks is for number 4, for example, we know our formula. This would be pi times the radius squared times the height. But when I go to plug in these values and I do pi times the radius, so 10 squared times the height, 15.2, I'm very specifically only going to type in this into the calculator. You are not going to type in pi. And again, the way that's going to look is we're just going to type in 10 squared times 15.2, and that gives me 1,520. So 1,520, and we still have pi, and we're just going to tack it on to the end. So 1,520 pi is what it's going to be in terms of pi. Once you have it in terms of pi, if you wanted to then take this and calculate it exactly like to the nearest tenth, all you would do is type in this. You would just type in what you just got, so 1,520 pi. And that's going to multiply them for you and give you your answer. This is going to be 4,775.2. This time we only use one decimal place because it told me to the nearest tenth, which is just our first decimal place. It's a little bit blurry. Let me see if I can focus it a bit more. That's better. For number 5, we do the same process, except that is diameter, and we want the radius. Radius of that would equal 8. The formula we are going to use would be pi times the radius, which is 8 squared, times the height, which is 7. And again, we only type that into our calculator at first. So 8 squared times 7 gives me 448 pi. And to take that and get it exact, we would punch in 448 pi to get 1,407.4. Then last but not least, we are going to have number 6, which already has our radius and our height. So we have pi times the radius, which is 1.5, times the height, which is 4. So again, only type that in. We do not type in 4 or type in the pi. So 1.5 squared times 4, it's going to give me 9. So this will be 9 pi. And 9 times pi gives me about 28.3. That's it. That's how we do these types of problems. Okay? Now, visual problems, of course, are going to be easier. All you are doing is taking values and plugging them in. Word problems are not that much different. For word problems, the only difference is you have to read a little bit carefully and pick up on some context clues. For example, in number 7, it says the area of the base, so that's going to be key. The area of the base of the cylinder is 150 square inches, and it says if the volume of the cylinder is 1,050. So it gives us two pieces of information, the area of the base and the volume. Well, normally, this formula we've been using doesn't have area of the base in it. It just has volume and pi r squared and the height. However, we do have a formula that does have the area of the base, and it's right here. So this will be the formula we'll be using for that problem. Although technically, this is the formula we've been using for all of them, because this part of this equation is represented by pi r squared. So in really, we haven't been doing a different problem. So for this, we start off with our base. Volume equals area of the base times the height. The area of the base is what we're going to be replacing. And then we're replacing it with 150. We do not know the height, but we do know that the volume is 1,050. And once we have all of this, we have enough to solve the problem because this is just a basic two-step equation. And we've done these before. Divide both sides by 150, and you would get, after your division, 1050 divided by 150 is 7. So the height of this cylinder would be 7 inches. For number 8, also very similar, not too much different. It has parts of a shape available, but not the entire formula. Once again, it starts off with telling me the volume is going to be 942. It says that the height of our cylinder is going to be 12 feet, and it asks for the radius. So this time, we do need our formula that has the radius. So this time, the formula will be volume equals pi times the radius squared times the height. We do need it this time because we need to find the radius. It also tells me this time to use 3.14 for pi. So I am going to replace pi with a number this time. So volume is 942. So 942 equals, we replace pi with 3.14. We still do not know what my radius is, but we do know my height is now going to be 12. And then we would solve this problem. I'm going to start by dividing both sides by 3.14 to isolate that. divide by 3.14. That's going to eliminate the pi portion of this. If I do that division in my calculator, you will get 300 exactly equals r squared times 12. To isolate the r squared, we're then going to divide both sides by 12. And that's going to give you 25 equals r squared. Now, this is something we've only talked about really in warm-ups, which is how to get rid of the power of 2. If you remember from when we talked about Pythagorean theorem, we talked about this symbol right here. That symbol is called the square root, and it is the opposite of the power of 2. So we are just going to place this symbol on both sides of my equation, and that cancels out my square of 2, leaving me with r equals the square root of 25. Now, your calculator does have the ability to do this, but you're going to need to click second, make sure you see that arrow, and then you'll have to look in the blue writing. Right here, this button is going to have that square root button. So we're going to click it, and it's going to give me square root, and we just type in square root of 25, and it gives me 5. What it's doing is it is calculating what two numbers multiplied to get that number. So the answer is going to be 5 feet. Okay? Number 9 is a little bit easier. This one is a little bit more straightforward. It just gives you the diameter and the height. It gives you both of those right off the bat. So when I have volume equals pi times the radius squared times the height, we just have to know that we have to divide the diameter by 2. So 3 divided by 2 is going to be 1.5. Volume equals pi times the radius, 1.5, squared, times the height, which is 2. We just type all of that into our calculator. So we've got pi times 1.5 squared times the height, and that gives me 14.137. It says to round to the nearest hundredth, so I'm going to round this 3. That is a 5 or more, so I'm going to round the 3 up to a 4. So this is going to be 14.14 meters cubed. It's going to be my volume for number 9. And the last one looks the scariest just because there's a lot of words, but it's really no different than any of the other problems. In fact, I would say it's easier than number 8. It's about the same as number 9 or 7. For this one, it says Drew and Bo each bought a cylindrical water bottle to football practice. Drew's water bottle has a diameter of 3 inches and a height of 7 inches. Bo's water bottle has a radius of 2 inches and a height of 9. So we have two different people. We have Drew and we have Bo. Both of them are going to be using the same formula we've been using, volume equals pi r squared times the height, but both of them have different values. Drew, if we have a diameter of 3, well, we just did a problem like that, then we know the radius is going to be 1.5. So Drew's formula would look like pi times 1.5 squared times a height of 7. Versus Bo, his formula would look like pi times the radius of 2 inches, so 2 squared, times the height of 9 inches. Those are going to be their two formulas. If I were to calculate this, Drew being at, let's see, pi times 1.5 squared times the height of 7, that's going to give me 49.48. So we've got 49.48. That's going to be Drew. And for Bo, we have pi times 2 squared times a height of 9. So Bo, his water bottle is going to be 113.09. Well, if I round this up, what number comes after 9? That would be 10. So we would have a 0 and carry the 1 and drop it here. 1 plus 0 gives me 1. So this is going to become 113.10, 0.10, or just 0.1. So 113.1. That's Bo's. So whose water bottle holds more water? Well, that's going to be pretty easy. It's going to be Bo. Bo's water bottle holds more. And the second question is how much more? Well, if I'm asking how much more, I would just take 113.1, subtract 49.48. That much more, about 63.662 cubic inches more. So that would be, whoops, can't really see that. It's kind of a bit of a blur. We've got 63.62 cubic inches more for Bo. That's it. These were our guided notes today. This was everything that we did in class before we started on the assignment. We did not do number 11. Make sure, if nothing else, that you know two things. The two most important things from the notes today are, first, knowing the difference between diameter and radius, or being able to calculate the radius if given the diameter, and this formula right here. This formula was more important than this volume equals base times height. They're both important, but if you can only remember two things, remember this and remember this formula. As long as you remember those two pieces, you are in at least okay shape for this unit. But that is going to be it. I hope this helps. If you were absent, again, this is all we did, and we did one assignment today. That was a single piece of paper, front and back, with 11 questions total. So that's it, and bye.